everyone, and welcome to January of 2025. We can't believe it. We're here with you. We've made it into another year. Thank you for being here with us, Reimagine, for this very special virtual Candlelight Vigil, our first to kick off this year. We've been doing these vigils now for over 4 years. That means hundreds of vigils we've created to be with, to honor, to process our grief, our pain, our losses, and to celebrate community and connection and what it means to wrap our arms around the totality of this human experience. My name is Brad Wolf, and I'm the Executive Director of Reimagine. We are a nonprofit organization. And our mission is to help people of all backgrounds face loss, adversity, and mortality to create truly a more compassionate world. We want to see things differently. And that means that there are these concepts, these experiences that we all have around loss, injustice, pain, loneliness, and suffering. But we believe that together, by interrogating them, by questioning, by investigating, by being with one another and opening up new dialogue, we can connect loss to love, injustice to equality, our pain to our growth, our loneliness to community, and our suffering ultimately to service in the world. And just by showing up here today in this space, in this virtual space, this is an act of service. This is an act that truly is reducing human suffering by being here together in community. There's so much we each bring to this space, and we're going to talk more about that. You're each going to have a chance to express what it is you're carrying in your hearts to this space. But by being here with one another, by receiving one another's presence, we have the opportunity to move a little bit closer to what's on the right side of this equation here. So before we get started, I just want to go over some of the technology that's supporting us. Zoom. We're all familiar with it this many years now out from the pandemic, though it's still with us. I don't want to say that it's not, and so many of us in our community have been affected and are still affected by the pandemic. But we started our first vigil, I think it was the first month of that pandemic, and we haven't stopped subsequently for these online spaces. You don't have to have your microphone on. You have the opportunity here to just sit back, to be with one another in the comfort of wherever you are, and to relax into this space. No need to speak. There'll be an opportunity perhaps at the end for a couple voices, but we'll see what happens. If you're able to turn your camera on, that would be wonderful, as the only thing that really binds us here are these squares of faces that we get. And if not, it's okay. We'll be bound together just through the names or whatever you have on your Zoom screen. Everything here is an invitation. Now, for any questions you may have, there is this chat button, and you can ask. I have these incredible colleagues that are joining me in organizing this experience, and we're all here to support you in answering any questions you may have in the chat. That being said, the chat is mostly here ultimately later on for the key element of tonight's experience, an honor ceremony, where each of us is going to have the opportunity to name people in our lives or parts of our lives that we want to honor in our own hearts, and perhaps with this warm group of bystanders all holding space together for that. Finally, if you need closed captioning and would like to see the words that are being said strewn across the screen, and you can follow along that way, there is this closed captioning CC button that I want to call out in case that would be of help for anyone here. Now, why don't we get the chat going? If you're out here and you've joined so far, if you wouldn't mind sharing not who you're here in honor of or the why, but just what emotions are you feeling heading into this 2025? And maybe your name those emotions and where you're dialing in from this evening. Now, I'd be remiss as you're doing that to mention that this is a candlelight ceremony. I have a candle here, and in just a couple seconds, truly, we're going to be lighting candles collectively to kick off the ceremony. So if you don't have a candle handy, this is your chance to go grab a candle and a match or matches, depending on how astute or adept you are at lighting matches. It takes me often a couple. So grab your candles now, and if you don't have a candle, no worries whatsoever. So now I want to turn it over to my colleague Andy Engel, who you're going to hear from as really leading what we'll introduce as the sacred conversation at the center of this experience. But I want to invite Andy in here to let us know a little bit about what kind of space this is and what kind of space this is not, to really set a container for our time together.
Thanks, Brad. Welcome, everyone. This is a collective space to grieve. It's a space that cultivates compassion for others and for ourselves. Most of us have arrived here with some kind of pain in our hearts. There are fires raging in California. There's murder in Sudan. There's so much violence around the world. Our hope is to help people of all backgrounds and all abilities to face loss, adversity, and mortality, and to create a more compassionate world. This is a space for bravery. It takes courage to show up for others, especially for people who you don't know. And it takes courage to lament and to grieve in public. There are so few spaces to acknowledge and share our personal and our collective grief. And with all that's going on in the world, now more than ever, people need access to gatherings where they can talk openly and freely about living and dying, about illness, but also about joy. Let's choose to respect and honor all lives lost, regardless of religion, nationality, or ethnicity. So thank you for co-creating this space with us. Finally, this space is not perfect. We might fumble, we might falter, and we might offend, but we ask for your grace. What this space isn't. It's not about blaming. It's not about imposing belief systems on others. It's not about providing solutions or fixing things. Another thing I want to emphasize is that although this is not a political space, it is a space to cultivate social justice. Our colleague Mazen Jamal has offered this definition of justice. It's an environment of integrity and wholeness, achieved through healing and transformation. When justice is present, we can trust that our safety and well-being are valued in a community or society. This is our aspiration for tonight.
Thank you so much, Andy. And this is an opportunity now. If this doesn't feel like the right space for you to be in, no harm, no foul, and moving on with your evening to do something else. For everyone else who chooses to be with us, thank you so much. Every choice is the right choice, and we're grateful to have you with us through this ceremony. With that in mind, I want to let you know a little bit about what we're going to be doing. We're about to move into this candle lighting. Then we are going to have that conversation I mentioned between Andy and our special guest, John. We have another special guest joining us, Jamie, who I'll introduce in a bit as well, who will be leading us through the honor ceremony. We're going to extinguish our candles as a community, and we'll have some announcements and a closing ritual at the very end, and we'll be on our way in an hour and 15 minutes from now. So thank you so much for participating with us. Now it is time to light the candles. So why don't we all take a second before we read this collective blessing and light our candles. I would like to call up three incredible colleagues, Amanda, Andy, and Nicole from Reimagine, who are collectively going to be reading this blessing three times. And I invite each of you, wherever you are, if you so choose, to read along with us and share these words out loud if you're so moved. And Amanda, I think you might be on mute. So we'll wait for Amanda to come back. I see. Oh, here she is.
Thanks,
All right. Great.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
By lighting our candles, we mourn division, terrorism, murder, war, trauma, hatred, and all that is disconnected from love. We honor our personal dead, the dead across the world, and all of us still here together.
So I've just closed the slide presentation, so we have an opportunity to look at this beautiful gallery. And if you wouldn't mind holding up your candle to light your face or your screen so we can all see your candles. And let's just take a minute to find somebody we don't know, to make internet eye contact, and to just share a mantra or a blessing or a prayer, something in your heart for that person, to wish them some hopeful message that you would have for that one person that you do not know. I'll find somebody myself as an example. I see Pam Davis. So let's take 15 seconds or so and just try this together. All right, thank you all. Thank you, Pam. Um, to just take a second and think in our hearts for a stranger. What if everyone in the world right now was not doing whatever they're doing and instead was joining us in sharing something to someone we didn't know with some warm, positive intention in our hearts? What would that mean about the world? So it's just a nice pause in our day, and it really sets the table for what we're going to do now. I see all the beautiful and painful mix of emotions you've shared in the chat, and just very, we're all humbled to be in each other's presence. And now is the time to really ground in the future part of the evening with our candles lit. I want to introduce our special guest, John Onwuchekwa. John is an Atlanta-based author. He's an entrepreneur, a podcaster, and advocate for grief literacy. His work opens up conversations for those struggling with grief and loss, particularly Black and Brown communities. He holds a Doctorate of Ministry from Emory University's Chandler School of Theology. He's one of the founding pastors of Cornerstone Church in the historic West End of Atlanta. He's also the founder of ventures like Portrait Coffee and the We Go On tour. Named after his book, We Go On, is an immersive experience that explores the intersection of grief and hope that uses storytelling, music, visuals, laughter, and connection. John is a co-host of the We Go On alongside his colleague Rich Perez, who spoke last fall at Reimagine about the ambiguous grief that he experienced after changing careers and moving to a new city. John, I'm so grateful that you've joined us this evening. You're going to be in conversation with my fabulous colleague, Andy Engel, who helped organize, really spearheaded the organization of this event. I'm so grateful for you both to join. I'll depart and let you two have this dialogue that will ground us all, but just maybe beginning for both of you this evening, lighting this candle today. What has you lighting this candle on this day?
Yeah, I'll start. For me, it's a month ago today, my wife's grandmother passed after a very quick and aggressive bout with cancer. And so, yeah, it like all grief, it's so textured and layered and complicated on so many levels. And so, yeah, today on the 1 month anniversary, we're just trying our best to live at the intersection of grief and hope. So, yeah, for Origin Holly.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
It's good to be here with you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of my Uncle Michael, who was a peacemaker. He worked hard on disarmament in the 80s and in the 90s, particularly in Pakistan and India. He died a few years ago, and I'm missing him tonight. And tonight I want to honor someone who's here tonight who brought us together, John. It's our colleague, Steph Sarrazin, who is here. Steph helped me organize the identity loss, ambiguous grief series that we did back in October. You were supposed to join us.
Yeah.
Possible. Rich stepped in. He was fantastic. And I was hoping there would be an opportunity like this one to bring you back and to introduce you to our community. So I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I loved your book, We Go On. Here we go. Everyone should check this out. It's John's response to the book of Ecclesiastes. Some of you may know this book from the Hebrew Bible, so it's significant to both Christians and to Jews. I know of it because growing up, going to synagogue, we would read what we called Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, on Sukkot, which is the Feast of the Tabernacles. It's around the high holidays in the fall, and it's a time where we're thinking about our own fragility, and we build these temporary shelters near our homes, and we're exposed to the sky. So of course, I'm thinking about the fragility in California right now, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our colleague, J'aime Morrison, later tonight, who is in Santa Monica, but is now with a friend in Silver Lake across the city. So J'aime, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. And Ecclesiastes, it's significant to people of faith, but it's also significant to secular folks, existentialists, philosophers. Right. It's wrestling with the biggest questions. We hear quotes and verses from Ecclesiastes in pop culture. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. There is nothing new under the sun. And Ecclesiastes is also meaningful to fans of folk music. Some of you have already seen the new Bob Dylan biopic. So you may have seen the character of Pete Seeger. The source for his song Turn, Turn, Turn comes from chapter 3, verse 1. Um, but tell me, John, what inspired you about Ecclesiastes? Why build this book around this book of Ecclesiastes?
Yeah. Um, so for me, it just came at an interesting time in my life. So it was about 10 years ago. I was 30 years old. I'd already been a pastor for 8 years. And 6 weeks before I'm getting ready to start this church, I get the call, right? That everybody fears. I can remember the details like it was yesterday, right? Like I still remember that Longhorn Steakhouse in Orlando where I had to walk outside and I remember how people's faces, yeah, twisted between just shock and horror and despair as I'm outside and they just heard me scream the words into my iPhone. He's dead, right? My 32-year-old brother died. And it was sudden. And I remember being outside of that Longhorn Steakhouse and I just held on. I could hold on to nothing except the anxiety that came from knowing I would have to call my mom and my dad and my three brothers and sisters and put them through the same thing. Um, we started the church 6 weeks later, and over the course of the next year, my life completely fell apart to a point where, at 31 years old, I had very, very close friends after this crazy, like, I just had this crazy, like, blow up in a parking lot mall from people that took a parking spot. And I had friends that just pulled me to the side and they said, John, we feel that you being a pastor and helping people put their lives together has been an anesthesia that has numbed you to the fact that your life is falling apart. Um, you need to take some time and just be. And so I remember like being in this room that I'm in right now, this 150 square foot room on the backside of my house. And I read the opening pages of that book and it gripped me, right? And it just says like meaningless, meaningless, everything's meaningless. And those words gave me the most hope that I had since I saw my brother's body drop into the ground. And it was because, yeah, for anybody that's familiar with the book, it's written from the perspective of a guy who wants you to think of Solomon as a king. And if you know anything about him, he didn't just live the life of his dreams. He is a guy that lived the life of all of our dreams collectively. And what struck me so much was that I felt the vanity of life and I thought it was circumstantial. I felt that way because I'm depressed in this valley. And within those opening words, I saw somebody who was just as depressed as I was, but he was on a mountaintop. And that's what struck me, right? It was like, if I can be depressed in a valley and somebody can be depressed in a mountaintop, then maybe depression isn't necessarily circumstantial. And if depression isn't circumstantial, maybe hope and joy isn't either, right? Maybe nothing about my life has to change and everything can change. And that was the day, right? That it just solidified inside of me. Like maybe tragedy doesn't ruin anybody. Maybe hopelessness does. And if that's it, then like my task is I've got to try to hold on to hope however I can. So the book was literally just me grasping. I'm trying to hold on to hope because we all know after a grief and a loss, hope gets very slippery, right? And I was just trying to hold on to it.
John, you refer to the author of Ecclesiastes,
Yeah.
attributed to King Solomon, but you refer to the author as the teacher.
Yeah.
You talk about also your brother Sam being
Yeah.
a teacher. Can you talk more about Sam's role as your mentor?
Yeah. So it's you know, I grew up the third of five kids um to Nigerian immigrant parents. I turned 40 this year. My dad turned 80 this past year. All right. So we are separated generationally and culturally. So when it came time for somebody to kind of walk me through life and teach me the trivial things to like the important things, right? So just at every stage of my life, Sam was there, right? Sam was the one that was there that taught me how to skate backwards at a skating rink and how to hold the girls' hands with the tips so that my sweaty palms didn't turn them off, right? Sam taught me that. But he also taught me how to invest and how to buy my first home. He taught me how to afford the engagement ring that I gave to my wife 17 and a half years ago. Um, I I have ADHD, so I am very unfocused and last minute. Sam was somebody that was very driven. So he graduated college in 3 years, started a master's program. And so his last year of college, he is teaching um, teammates on his team that are in his class because he's getting his master's lecturing at the school. And my last year of school, I have to take 41 credit hours in the year because I wasted my first 3 years. And so uh yeah, when I lost Sam, it felt like it didn't just feel like I lost a brother. It felt like, taking a long road trip, being in unfamiliar territory, and the signal goes out on your phone and you don't have a GPS and a map, right? So in so many ways, I felt stranded, and it's hard enough to feel stranded when it comes to life. It's so much harder to feel stranded when it comes to navigating the worst day of your life and every subsequent day after that, right? So, yeah, it's that kind of loss that, yeah, we all know. I mean, there's no expiration date. And so you still feel it with every celebration. Like you just notice the absence of his voice.
I want to talk about your other brother, Emmanuel.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, we we talk at Reimagine often about this idea of um, post-traumatic growth, this idea that sometimes when we're facing something hard or we're experiencing something hard,
Yeah.
sometimes something unexpectedly happens where we something grows in our life. And maybe you can talk about your relationship with Emmanuel before Sam's passing and after.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like I said, I'm the third of five kids. I have two older brothers, and they couldn't be more different, right? So while Sam was the kind of guy who, like, Sam never said a cuss word, and when he did try to cuss, it it felt like somebody like wearing shoes that were too big for them, right? It's like very clunky. This doesn't work for you. My brother Emmanuel has struggled with addiction of every type for the better part of the last 3 decades, right? So it's just been difficult. So for a large part of life, especially after he went off to college, when I was a freshman in high school, me and my brother, oldest brother, were very estranged. And I just did not have the capacity at all to engage with him. I didn't know how, but Sam was the hub, all right? Or Sam was the little like hub within the spokes that were our family. And so the primary connection that I had with my brother and even the rest of my family came through Sam. So when Sam passed, I didn't just lose him. I had to start from scratch to rebuild every other relationship with my family. And um, my brother very quickly moved to Atlanta to rekindle the relationship that we had. And yeah, it's been 9 years, and I still don't think we've recovered just from that, right? You like in the early days of grief, there's an impulsivity that is well-meaning as people try to recapture lost times and try to ensure that they don't live with the regret that they feel so deeply over the loved one that they lost. And uh yeah, that move fractured our relationship in ways that like I wish that I had better news to share today, but even today, things are still very, um, yeah, awkward to say the least.
I also want our audience to know a bit about this experience you had in Nigeria, going back with your
Yeah,
family on this visit. Uh,
yeah,
can you talk about this experience you had there?
yeah. So, this is where I think this is probably the biggest pivot point of my life outside of Sam, and it was, I was 17 years old. I graduated high school and I was getting ready to, right, live what I thought was the life of my dreams, right? The girl I was dating at the time, I thought we were going to go to the same school and get married. Me and Sam were going to go, I was going to go and play basketball at the school that he played at. And the summer after my freshman year of high school, my parents took me and my four brothers and sisters to Nigeria, and we were driving back from one of my dad's friends' towns on the north side of the country, and our car gets a flat tire late at night. This is 2002 in Nigeria, so pre, lots of cell phones, the whole nine. We step out of the car to get our tire changed, and when we step back into the car, or when we get ready to step back into the car, two men come from out of the bushes with automatic guns, and they shoot them in the air, and they tell all of us to get down on the ground. So here I am, 17 years old, laying down on the ground, my body flinching with every one of our bags that hit the ground that like caused this rise in my chest. And I remember just being at that point, and uh I don't know what it was, but it was like it wasn't the fear of death that gripped me most. For me, I was really gripped with a sense of I think I've wasted my life. So if I were to pass right here, one of the things that gripped me is I really felt this sense of if I were to leave this earth, nobody would miss me. I don't think I've made a positive enough impact in this world. And so at 17 years old, I could remember just like, yeah, sitting on that dirt road and like praying to God or the universe or Oprah or Tom Cruise or whoever's really in charge of this whole thing, right? And just saying like, if you get me out of this, I promise I just want to live my life ensuring that I'm preparing other people to live better in this world once I'm gone. And I feel like that day in July 2002 forever changed my life 22 years ago. I think I look back to almost every act of altruism or thing that I've tried to do with my life to give. And I feel like the origin was that day, just, yeah, being granted a second shot at life before I went to school at 18 and, yeah, wasted it.
So let's go now to today. Fast forward from this near-death experience in Nigeria
Yeah.
to the work that you're doing in community,
Yeah.
both with business, with your previous work as a pastor. Um, Something that's on the minds of folks, and I saw it in the chat,
Yeah.
is this month, it's a time of regime change in this
Yeah.
country. Inauguration is on January 20th. And there was this quote in We Go On that stood out for me.
Yeah.
And that quote is, quote, when teachers and leaders fail us, it disorients us,
Hmm.
shakes our confidence. We become disillusioned, bitter, and angry. And when trust is broken, it's really hard, if not impossible, to rebuild. So we're living at a time now of mistrust, disconnection, social isolation.
Hmm.
What are the strategies that you've been learning as a former pastor and as a current entrepreneur to repair the social fabric and to build trust?
Yeah. One of the most important lessons that I've learned is just depending on your previous Google search history, it's going to attribute this to Ben Franklin or John Dewey or somebody else. But it just says a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And I think one of the things that I've seen is so much of what I lamented or what I lament about current civil engagement is that people are so people are so rightly burdened down by the problems that are very, very clear and apparent in our world. And because the weight is so heavy, people are so quick to try to solve and to say, what's the answer? What's the answer? What's the answer? And I think what I've learned is that half the work is really like spending more time trying to dig into, no, what is the source of the problem? What are we really trying to get at, right? We're driving down, my daughter's 7 years old, and we drive past a coffee shop that used to be in a place, and there is this big hole in the ground, right? They're getting ready to put up this big building. And my daughter says, Dad, why is there a big hole in the ground? And I said, oh, well, sweetheart, they're getting ready to build this like big multi-story building. And she says, Dad, somebody should tell them that they're going backwards, right? And I'm like, no, 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 sweetheart, they're not going backwards. But if you ever are going to build it up to the height that you need to get it, the first step is not a step up, it is a step down. You've really got to make sure that that foundation goes low. And so I think the past few years have taught me that it's whatever unity, I don't think the unity that we had was broken. I think the thin veneer of like pseudo unity that we had was cracked and exposed, and it showed that there was deep distrust down to the core, right? And this is not just a cap that we need to put on the top of it. I've learned that this really feels like a root canal. So a lot of my work is aimed at not even solving the problems, but ensuring that people have the same definitions and understanding of the nature of the problems. And if I can get people to speak the same language, then I feel like, okay, I've done my job and I've teed this up for somebody to come else or else to come and to take them that last mile.
This idea of not solving the problems
Yeah.
for this area of social fabric,
Right.
it's bringing me back to the grief space, which
Yeah.
that we were talking about, and how, in that space, I've heard from everyone, from you, from Steph,
Yeah.
it's not about fixing It should not be about fixing. Grief is something that isolates us too. Uh,
Yes.
but I'm curious, from your perspective, can it have a role in making us feel more connected?
Oh, so not just can it have a role, it is the thing that makes us feel connected. And yeah, this is what I mean, right? Like, now, metaphors matter, right? Metaphors don't just help us understand concepts. Metaphors help us navigate reality. So bad ones aren't just unhelpful. Bad ones can be very, very harmful. Here's what I mean. The most predominant metaphor that people think of, right, when we hear about grief is we hear of grief as a journey. Um, Journeys start, journeys end. The quicker that you run and sprint, the quicker you can get towards the end. Um, Grief starts, but grief does not have an expiration date. And I've learned that it is a cruel joke to send somebody in search of light at the end of a closed tunnel, right? So I don't want to talk about grief as a journey and keep people in perpetual frustration that they have not reached a finish line that is not there. I think it is more helpful to think of grief as a language, right? The goal of a journey is to finish. The goal of a language is to become fluent, right? And lang- it's about connection. And what I find is that if humanity were a country, grief would be the official language, right? It's the thing that unites us all. It's the reason why, in such a polarized political landscape that we're in, it's the reason why this diverse intergenerational call can take place because regardless of what else goes on, grief is the thing that unites us. And when you embrace the fact that grief is a language, you realize that if the goal is connection, then fluency is what you need. And fluency of a language comes from realizing that every language has multiple dialects. And this is where things go really wrong for us. Um, when it comes to grief, I think there's at least two, right? Tangible grief, we all know how to speak that one, right? I have a loved one, they die, their body is dropped into the ground, tears sprint down my cheeks, chasing their body into the ground. And when that takes place, um, I cry, but when I cry, tears fall freely, but the floor stays very dry because everybody has a shoulder to cry on. Ambiguous grief is different. Ambiguous grief or loss, this is the death of relationship, the death of the picture that you had of someone, right? The diagnosis of a parent or yourself with a chronic illness or dementia, where even though they're still here, you talk about them in the past tense. Stephanie says it like this: it is somebody living, but not as they once were, right? These are deaths with no funerals and funerals with no caskets. And when your body and your brain physiologically respond in the same way, and the tears fall from your cheeks, you can easily drown in a puddle of your own tears because there is nobody to catch them. Because most folks say grieving, but nobody died. And I think what we need at that time is not um, people asking us why we're sad. I think what we need that time, we don't even need advice. We just need a group of people that realize that shoulders catch tears better than soliloquies, right? We need people that can come around and say, no, all of that you feel on the inside, that is grief. And so I'm going to hold space for you, even if there is no funeral or casket. And when you dignify somebody's sadness or emotion like that, it has a way of connecting you, and you feel like I thought that there were no words, but this person helped me, yeah, find words where I thought that there were none. And so, yeah, grief is the official language of humanity.
I love it. Let's get all more fluent. You
Yeah.
brought up ambiguous grief. So I
Yes.
want to ask you if you're willing to talk about you and your wife, Chandra, and your experience of trying to become parents.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was a young pastor. So I pastored from 22 years old to 38 years old. Me and my wife got married at 23 years old, and we were ready to have kids right away. And over the course of 10 years, we dealt with unexplained infertility. So went to the doctors, everything worked like it should. They said, "We don't know why y'all aren't getting pregnant." And what compounded it was I was pastoring a young church, and throughout the course of those 10 years, I cannot count the amount of times we had friends come to our house bawling in tears because they got pregnant accidentally and they wished that it would hold off. And we had to, in our grief, counsel and talk to other people about why what they had was such a blessing. And it was every time, it was just heart wrenching. And we we tried to adopt, and that took, yeah, years, like 4 or 5 years of just the worst. You learn the worst about the foster care system and how much things don't move until money changes hands. And it is just, it was just, yeah, like infertility is not the type of grief that is life threatening, but it is soul emptying, right? You think of the start and the end of every month, getting your hopes high, um, every month, and 120 times in a row, your hopes crashing down. That is just something that, yeah, I would never wish on my worst enemy. Yeah, it was just, it stayed with us. And yeah, my brother passed away April 14th, 2015. Um, and April 14th, 2017, um, my baby girl, who we adopted but was born premature, um, she was on a breathing machine for 8 days, and she took her first breath 2 years to the day that my brother took his last breath. And that was the day I realized, most people think that grief and hope are these parallel streets, that if you travel down the road of grief, that you've got to stay on it until you get off and you can get on the road of hope. But um, my baby girl taking her first breath 2 years to the day that my brother took his last breath taught me that grief and hope were not parallel streets. Grief and hope are these winding roads that intersect at multiple points. And the best thing about being at an intersection is that you're on both streets at the same time, right? And so, yeah, I would just say, like, um, yeah, we don't have to look for a light at the end of the tunnel, because life puts us at different intersections where, yeah, the light shines bright even in the darkest days of our grief.
Hmm.
Thank you, John. I want to bring in my colleagues. First with Brad. He wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah, no, I'm just so moved by this conversation, John and Andy. Thank you so much. This concept that you're describing about uh, our literacy
Yeah.
and grief being this universal language that really is the river that we need to bathe in to really connect to our full humanity, um, is just really poignant.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how do we, it's just so interesting because it reimagines. Sometimes we do talk about growth journeys.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, but when we talk about the term journey,
Yeah.
we mean journey without an end.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Because a journey, because we're trying to acknowledge a journey doesn't have an end.
Right.
And that made me realize in you even talking about it, you know, you're right. Some people, when they must hear the word journey, they think of this finite ending.
Yeah.
And that's not what we mean. And therein, all of a sudden, it's the definitions
Yeah.
become challenging. What's a journey? What is
Yeah.
grief? What, and I see the way that we're not able to communicate
Yeah.
around so much in our own personal lives. And then if you think even more globally, even within our own hearts,
Yeah.
how can we, I don't want to say get on the same page. How can we increase our fluency as a
Yeah.
culture?
Yeah.
What do you recommend? What would be some ideas you have for increasing our literacy?
Yeah. Increasing it always starts with phrases, right? So this is what I've found. I've found that when it comes to grief, if we realize grief or if we embrace grief as a language, then one of the things that you learn is story predates written language. So scholars will say language was created for the purpose not of sharing propositions, but of sharing stories. And one of the things that really helps us grasp any concept is stories. So one of the phrases that I've just learned to use is that when I find that somebody has lost a loved one, they're going to be littered with sorry for your loss, sorry for your loss, sorry for your loss, which is understandable. But when I'm with somebody that's just lost, I'm not saying sorry for your loss. I'm saying, would you tell me a story about your love, right? Would you like let me in? That if I say sorry for your loss, sometimes it feels like I can kind of just shut it down. It's I have acknowledged that you've lost, and I'm spending my time addressing the thing that you don't now have instead of starting to talk about the thing that you will never lose. And that is the relationship that you had, the memories, the love. That's what I want to talk through. And the more that I talk through those things, the more that you start to learn, I think, two things, right? Um, uh, when somebody talks about a thing that they lost, I want them to know um, their grief story is not a grief story, or their grief story is not just a grief story. Their grief story is a love story. Every grief story is a love story, and every love story is a grief story. And so I've learned this from my friends Jordan and Jessica Rice. They're both in their early 40s, really quick because I know our time's short. Jordan and Jessica are both on their second marriage because in their early 20s, both of their spouses tragically died. One in a motorcycle accident, the other one to a rare form of cancer. And they dated other people before they met, and everybody that they dated was sorry for your loss, and the relationship only went so deep. But when they would start to share their grief stories, it would make them uncomfortable. But then when Jordan and Jess found each other on their first date, they're sitting at a bar, bawling their eyes out, talking about their spouses that had passed, and they never looked back since. And what I love about their story is as they talk, it is impossible for Jordan and Jess to share their love story without sharing their grief story. And it is impossible for them to share the grief story of their spouses without their love stories. And so I found that when you do that, when you ask people about their love, not just give condolences for what they've lost, people just start to talk and you hear a fluency there. And we learn language like we learn almost everything else through stories.
Hmm. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah,
That is such a beautiful answer
yeah,
to that question, and I'm just really
yeah,
blown away um, by what you shared, and also thinking about what it requires
yeah,
to be with somebody's story and to
yeah,
really be with it. It takes time.
yeah,
It takes a curiosity. It takes your own vulnerability and maybe your own discomfort. So it requires us to really step into a lot, but the rewards feels, of love feels so ripe.
yeah, absolutely.
I want to bring in to join me here, J'aime Morrison, who's going to lead us in the honor ceremony. And also, I think we'll have a question for you as well in this transition. J'aime, it's so great to be with you. We're so um, heartened that you are safe, and our hearts go out to so many people in your vicinity there who are struggling and suffering through this fire in Southern California right now. That's just awful. And this is a space where we're mourning all of that. But J'aime, everyone, is a dancer, a choreographer, an educator, a widow, and a Reimagine collaborator. She has taught movement master classes and workshops in Shanghai, Dublin, Belfast, Cork, London, Los Angeles, and New York City, and she serves as a professor at Cal State Northridge. So, two incredible educators we're in the midst of this evening. Uh, as the founder of Morning Surf, J'aime explores how grief is expressed physically and how movement is an essential part of the grieving and healing process. After losing her beloved husband, Jim, to brain cancer in 2015, J'aime began working on a short film called Upwell, which illustrates the role of both dance and surfing in her grief, her never ending grief journey. The film received the Audience Award at the Cannes International Short Film Festival, and J'aime's last workshop at Reimagine was part of The Long Goodbye, a series last fall on the subject of anticipatory grief. We're so grateful you're here, J'aime. And before we transition to the honors ceremony, is there something you're holding in your heart that you would like to ask John?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. That was such a beautiful meditation on grief and language, something that I think a lot about myself. And the title of your book, We Go On, reminds me of Samuel Beckett's I Can't Go On, I'll Go On. Um, uh, so it's really resonated with me. And I was thinking about it, the work that you're working with, the writing. Ecclesiastes 3, and the section about, I've always thought it was fascinating that um, the line, a time to mourn and a time to dance, the dance and mourning are already connected through language in that statement. And for me, mourning has always been something that has been embodied. It's been something that moves in me, and I'm very attuned to the idea of movement. As a way of grieving. And I wonder with the beauty of your language and the interest that you have in language and your orator as a preacher, um, have you ever had an experience where language has failed you around grief, where the story doesn't come out in words, but perhaps comes out in a different way? Or how do you reconcile the sort of like the tension between words and ritual, or movement? I just think it's so interesting to think about because my own experience with my husband, he lost the ability to speak,
Yeah.
and so I couldn't communicate with him, and language had been so important to me as somebody who was in theater, who loves to read, but ultimately I had no language, so we had to find other forms of communication. So anyway, I just thought that would be kind of an interesting comment, really, that maybe you would speak to.
Uh, yeah. Yeah. So when my book came out in 2022, and this was right after the pandemic, and so everybody was real skittish about doing in-person events. I felt like for the environment that we were trying to cultivate around grief and hope, that for me to do that first set of events on the screen would kind of feel like a fireplace screensaver, right? It would, yeah, it'd be like all light and no heat. So for those events, one thing that we did back in 2022, and we've kept up 3 years later, is I realized how important words are for me, but that words do fail at a certain point. And for some folks, grief is a language, grief is a story. For some people, grief is a film, right? It is a song, music. So we've put together this um, multifaceted, immersive experience that, yeah, this will be our third year and we'll be in 30 cities across 3 different continents from last fall till May of this year. And so it is an evening of music and movement and hugs and comedy and storytelling and film
Mhm.
because yeah, there's um yeah, grief deserves like all of us and it deserves to come out in a way that everybody can engage and feel at home. So 100%. Um yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
So, John, thank you so much, and you're going to stick with us. But
Yes.
everyone, if you might right now, just if in the chat, if you wanted to share some gratitude with John that we could pass along, would be incredible as we transition to Jamie, who's going to introduce us to the honor ceremony portion of our experience this evening.
Thank you. That was so beautiful. So many beautiful phrases. I loved the language of grief. So many languages. I'm getting um, evacuation orders and notifications as I speak. So it's been just in all honesty, it's been a bit of a shaky day for me in Los Angeles. I just I just grabbed everything that I could take out of my home, and I'm in a friend's house right now. Um, and I'm very grateful that I was able to grab mementos and things that belong to my late husband. And I'm really holding in my heart the people who lost their homes and they lost all of their belongings and um, the animals. And I just am very grateful for the first responders who are fighting this hellish wind and heat to preserve what they can of our community. So I feel very keenly tonight that I am in a state of vigil. I'm vigilant right now about what's going on in Los Angeles, and I think to me a vigil means to to hold space, to be waiting, to be watching for news, for a sign, for a diagnosis, for some kind of answer to know that it will be okay. And the space of a vigil very much seems like a liminal space between certainty and uncertainty, between hope and loss, and between feeling rooted and feeling displaced. And the word vigil, it refers, of course, to a watch on the eve of a feast. That was the original meaning. And its Latin root um, means wakefulness, akin to being vigorous. And the other root is vegere or vegere, which is to enliven. And I find it fascinating that this act of watching and waiting and hoping, that there is an animating force within that energy of waiting and to enliven. So to me, this is very much a creative space to be in. It's a place where some of our most powerful, as John mentioned, some of our most powerful songs come from this space. Our deepest urge to pray, to dance, to connect with one another, and to create come from the space of not knowing and hoping and waiting. And that's the space that I'm in tonight, and that's the space that we're in tonight. I wanted to briefly, before we do the ceremony, briefly share a poem that my mother wrote about her memory of holding vigil as she waited for news about my father who had attempted suicide. In the poem, she draws on the imagery of church as a space of sanctuary, but it's not a religious poem so much as it's an homage to ritual. And after she wrote the poem, and after my father died, I was inspired to create a dance to the words of the poem with each gesture. Sorry. With each gesture like a bead on a rosary. For me, that's how I thought of it. So I'll just read the poem. I'm really sorry. This isn't my house. So. No red or amber glasses shield the votive candles, but glistening green, set in a heart formation, with one slight flame to spark a glimmer of my own. I'll choose the longest wick, but all the fire goes off askance, and now perversely darts again, astride, not rising. Oh, where is my little pearl rosary now? I would dwell on each sweet bead. I'll wait and still my heart with beauteous words, Cerise and Anatolia. Ah, yes, it burns straight up, a buoyant light. And now this hazy, metamorphic nuance, tangling, joining in the sensed air of evening benediction. And I just thought that was so resonant with John's comments about words and how language to me really is a kind of music. And so that words sort of transmute and become something physical in poetry. So I thought we'd do a little bit of breathing together before we do the candles. So I will invite you to put your hands over your heart and to feel whether you're sitting or standing or lying down, to feel your weight in your chair, to feel the pressure of your arms on your heart. And you can close your eyes if you'd like to and take a couple of deep breaths. Feeling the weight of your body. And then elongating the spine up, creating space in your spine, in your ribs. Taking a big breath in. And exhaling. And one of the first gestures that I did when I performed this piece was, I'll just show it to you briefly. So that was my translation of some of the words into gesture. And I think that gesture can be something that really is an intersection between language and movement, whether it is something that comes from a tradition or a practice, or something that is more experimental. But I invite you to think about the gesture of lighting the candle, the gesture of writing someone's name, the gesture of prayer, and all of the different ways that we physically can commemorate and memorialize our loved ones. So with that, I would like to invite you to put in the chat, whether that's on the bottom of your screen or on the top. Please write the name of the person you'd like to honor and anything else that you'd like to share about that person. And we'll do this in a ritual way with music by Brad.
season, turn, turn, turn. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. A time to every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. A time for every purpose under heaven. Wow, everyone, thank you so much for this incredible honor ceremony. We don't always know how long the chat is going to be active for with names and messages, and this was just a very beautiful expression of so many amazing souls who have entered this space with us, and not just you, but all of your loved ones who you've brought into this space. Now, just because the music has stopped, I don't want you to stop adding any more names you may have. And even if you don't share a name in the chat, even just thinking that's that person or that idea in your heart, we'll hold that space for you here. I also want to thank J'aime Morrison for all you've gone through today to be part of this experience. And I think you really honored your own grief and your own your husband and your mom through your share, and it was just very, very poignant to have you here with us this evening talking about what a vigil really is. We've done now, as we mentioned, hundreds of vigils, and no one's ever shared what is a vigil. And so to think about, what it means with the palpable sense of uncertainty that you're in right now, and so many people are in various different ways throughout the entire globe, just really resonant, and just couldn't think of a more perfect share. And the idea, we talked about words and the power of words versus movement, and what is language. And I feel like just everybody here, starting with you, J'aime, and John, and just has embodied kind of the beauty of the human language, whatever that is, in this space. So thank you so much. That is the honor ceremony. Now what we're going to do together, and first of all, before we move on, if you wouldn't mind actually just sharing your gratitude for J'aime. I'd be remiss not to have everybody here share something to J'aime for everything that you've brought forward today in each of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And I'd like to actually call you back, and John, as we come together now as a community to extinguish our candles. Now, again, this is only going to be an invitation for everyone, not some kind of edict. If you want to keep your light extinguishing on its own accord, that is your choice. But for those of you who so choose, we're going to read this blessing 3 times. And at the end, I'll count down from 3, and we can collectively exhale. And if you don't have a candle and you want to just join us in that breath, that would symbolize the same thing that we're each doing, which is releasing something more beautiful collectively out into the world as a cohort here. So thank you in advance, and read along wherever you are if again you choose. By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
By extinguishing our candles, we release light into our world to keep alive hope and the memories of those we honor today and tomorrow and for the rest of our lives.
3, 2, 1. So thank you all so much for being here this evening with us. Why don't collectively we just take one more breath, one more group breath on the count of 3. 3, 2, 1. Let's all inhale and exhale. Maybe 2 more because it's just feeling good. And inhale and an exhale. Final time. In and out. So with that concludes our formal ceremony this evening. And I'm just so grateful. Reimagine's grateful for each of you for showing up for each other, making the world a little bit brighter, a little bit more fluent in a language that we hope to have everyone learn, in a language we all have to hear. I know that at a minimum. So with that in mind, I want to bring back my colleague Andy Engel, who's going to share with us some upcoming Reimagine experiences that we have for you or for other people in your life that you might share this with.
We have a good number of programs throughout the year, and we always love hearing from you after an event to tell us your thoughts on it, where we could improve it. So before I begin, my colleague Nicole Tan is going to paste a link into the chat. We'd love to hear from you. So if you can start filling that out now while everything is fresh, that would be great. If you can do it a little later tonight, that would be fantastic. So next, this month, we've got Room for Grief on January 16th. It is held every third Thursday of the month, and we welcome everyone to Room for Grief, whether you want to learn about it or you're seeking support in your never-ending grief journey. Room for Grief is a peer-led drop-in situation. We leverage art, creativity, and prompts to foster conversation and offer pathways for those seeking to process and navigate all the feels. And we've got, on January 16th, our beloved Reimagine collaborator, Sherry Balul, facilitating. So join us for that. We have fantastic collaborator events all this month and all throughout the year. These are programs hosted by our community of grief coaches, yoga instructors, all kinds of folks are offering events on our platform. You can too, actually. We have opportunities for everyone to host their own events if you wish. Check these out. We've got end-of-life midwives, rituals for climate change, memory, photo, and story sharing. In addition, we've got a breathwork session for BIPOC folks in anticipation of the presidential inauguration. We've got a conversation about living with loss, and the first of 2 monthly somatic workshops led by J'aime Morrison. And the first one starts on January 26th. So if you're a fan of J'aime, I'm sure many of you are already, come back on January 26th for her workshop. And our next vigil in February February 5th to be exact, is with writer Sarah Labrie. Her debut memoir is No One Gets to Fall Apart, a New York Times editor's pick and a best book of the year according to NPR, Elle Magazine, and Esquire. She'll share reflections on grief, depression, her family's history of mental illness, and the legacy of slavery. So please join us for all these events.
Wow, thank you so much, Andy. We host over 300 programs a year, either free or at very little cost. And we can't do that without you, Andy, and without our community of collaborators who are hosting all of these incredible experiences. And so again, yes, we want to create more spaces in the world, different types of spaces. We believe everyone should have space, a free, accessible, and engaging space to find community support, to find community, to process, to be with one another, to think about topics like the ones we're talking about here. So if you can create some in your own community, that would be so powerful because, everyone knows their own community best. And so that's how this all works. We talked a little bit about this idea of a growth journey and storytelling and showing up for one another. Reimagine has been working on something for the last 2 years. We're trying to rewire how we consume and share stories in this kind of negative attention span economy to help people slow down, to be with each other's stories, to be able to reflect, support one another on their own journeys, to hold space, and to ultimately share and create our own ongoing, never-ending story of our journey through love and loss and the reality of our lives, but in a healthy way. How might we respond differently as a world to the hard parts of life? And if you're interested in participating in a social media platform that does stuff like this, Nicole, you tell me actually, should people share their email addresses? How can they share with us and get involved in this project, Nicole?
Actually, they can fill out the survey. One of the questions would be if they are interested in testing out the platform. So please complete the survey, and then there's an option to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Yeah, so please, if you're interested in getting involved and trying this out and helping us build this, it's at the point now where folks are actually starting to use it in some small test environments, and it's going very, very powerfully. And we think this is something that could really be a game changer for so many people in the world if we could scale this effort. So thank you in advance. All right, I wanted to share, well, first of all, before I share these poems, don't get ahead of me here. Just one last note within the survey. It also asks, if you'd be interested in contributing to support these efforts. Again, I want to mention that all these experiences are free and are only so because of the generous support from our entire community, all of you who show up. If there's some way, even if it's just $1, just $1 contributing to this movement allows us to talk to other donors and say, hey, look how many people are contributing to this idea. And that helps us get funding to really grow and expand this type of work that we're doing. So even if just $1 contribution, $2, whatever amount feels right for you would be powerful for us and our ability to Reimagine to grow this movement. Now, I did draft this poem, John and Jamie, to each of you, talking about words as you were speaking, as just some gratitude for what I was hearing, and I think what we were all hearing together. The poem is called Holding On to Hope. And so these are 5 lines and 3 syllables each. It's a very simple form of poetry I call 15s. So words were said. I dropped what I held to hold on to hope instead. And so thank you so much to John and to Jamie for showing us what it means to hold on to hope and to think about language, words, our own lives, grief, hope, all these things differently. And thanks also to Reimagine staff, Nicole. I don't think I thanked, and I want to honor specifically Amanda, our colleague Amanda, who had a significant loss over the holiday of your grandmother, Amanda, and she today built this beautiful altar that was holding space for all of us. So thank you so much to Amanda, who was only stepped into that role because my colleague Dara has been had to evacuate herself in Los Angeles, and like you, Jamie, had to pack up her material, some stuff, and get out of her house. So there's so much happening in the world right now. We're just so grateful for our staff, Andy, Nicole, Dara, Amanda, everyone at Reimagine, and then to all of you who showed up. It's one family who we're working to create in this world, and you showed up, and there's a poem for you here. Thank you. Every month we do this. Every month, sad but glad, to mourn, grieve, grow in love together. So with that, we're already 5 minutes over. Maybe just I'll turn one sentence each to John and Jamie to help us close this out. Any one sentence reflection on your thoughts now. Jamie, start with you. Let's see. I can't hear Jamie yet. Maybe you're muted.
The solace of togetherness.
Thank you, Jamie. And John.
Yeah. Patience is not just a virtue, it is a vital organ. And we wait in hope and anticipation.
Thank you so much. Let's conclude this tonight as we do most vigils here. I'll count down again and we'll all unmute. And if so inclined, if you want to just say the word love, you can say it 10 times in a row. Let's just hear what it sounds like on Zoom. We know happy birthday on our team. That does not sound good on Zoom when we sing it to each other. But I know the word love does sound good in harmony, in unison, in a cacophonous way. So let's just go out in a blaze of love. 3, 2, 1. Let's hear the loves.
Love,
Love, love to all.